Rain soaked through my jacket before I reached the end of the driveway. I stood on the front lawn of the house I grew up in, watching my suitcase lie open in the wet grass, clothes scattered across the mud like they meant nothing. Because to my parents they did mean nothing. I did mean nothing. My mother stood in the doorway with one arm stretched toward the street. Her face was calm. That was the part that broke me. Not anger. Not guilt. Just calm, like she was directing traffic. Figure it out, Avery. We are done financing your bad decisions. My father never turned around. He gripped the front door handle, pulled it shut, and turned the deadbolt. One clean sound. Final as a period at the end of a sentence. I stood there with my phone in my hand, 4% battery, rain running down the back of my neck. No cab money. No plan. Nowhere to go. My name is Avery Collins. I am 28 years old. And that night on the lawn was not where my story ended. It was where it finally, honestly began. Because a year later, the same parents who locked that door would be calling me 30 times a day. Not to apologize. To ask for money. 3 months before that night, my life looked nothing like disaster. I ran a small but steady consulting business helping mid-sized companies clean up their operations. I had built it over 4 years, working weekends, skipping vacations, turning down comfortable office jobs that would have paid me less. I was proud of it in a quiet way. The kind of proud that belongs only to you because nobody handed it over. I had a fiancé named Marcus Webb. He was steady and kind and laughed easily, the type of person who made rooms warmer just by walking in. We had an apartment near the river with a kitchen window that caught good morning light. We were saving for a house. I also had 2 parents who lived 40 minutes away and a younger brother named Theo who had never held a job longer than 8 months but always seemed to be rewarded for it. I told myself family was complicated. I told myself it evened out. I was wrong about that last part. But back then, standing in our little kitchen on a Tuesday morning while Marcus made coffee and the sun came through that window, I felt safe. Truly safe for the first time in years. I should have held on to that feeling harder. The call came on a Wednesday while I was reviewing a client proposal. A driver ran a red light. Marcus was on his way home from a hardware store. The impact was on the driver's side. By the time paramedics arrived, he was already unconscious. I drove to the hospital so fast I do not remember parking. I just remember running through sliding glass doors and a nurse saying words my brain kept refusing to process. Words like severe and surgery and we will know more by morning. I sat in a plastic chair for 11 hours without eating. I called my mother from that chair. She said, "Oh no, that's terrible. Keep us updated." Then she asked if I was sure he had been wearing his seatbelt, as though that detail might change how I was supposed to feel. My brother Theo texted once. "Hang in there." Then nothing. My father left a voice note saying these things happen and I should try to stay positive. I put my phone in my pocket and went back to watching the door of the surgical unit. The monitors beeped all night. I held Marcus's hand through the rails of the bed and talked to him about the kitchen window, the house we were going to buy, the dog we had argued about getting. I talked until my voice gave out. Marcus died on a Sunday morning, 11 days after the accident. I was in the room. The monitor changed its sound and a nurse came in quickly and I already knew before anyone spoke. I had known since the night before, when his doctor pulled me aside and used that careful voice doctors use when they are preparing you for the end. The funeral was small. Marcus had a sister named Pauline who flew in from Portland and held my hand through most of it. She was the only person that week who asked how I was actually doing, not how I was holding up. I have never forgotten that difference. My parents came to the service. My mother cried a little. Afterward, she found me near the refreshment table and put her hand on my arm. I thought for a moment she might say something real. She said, "This is why you should not get too emotionally dependent on people. It only leads to this kind of pain." She gave my arm one pat and walked away to refill her coffee. I stood there holding a paper plate I had forgotten about and understood, for maybe the first time clearly, that I was completely alone. Grief does not wait for you to get your finances in order. In the weeks after Marcus died, I stopped responding to client emails. I missed 2 deadlines and cancelled a strategy call I had been preparing for months. My inbox filled and I watched the number climb without opening anything. 3 clients pulled their projects in the first month. I could not blame them. My income dropped by 60% almost overnight. I drained my savings paying Marcus's medical bills. He had not yet been added to my insurance and his own coverage had a gap. I signed every authorization form they put in front of me without reading fully because I could not focus on words that long. By month 2 I was behind on rent. I sold electronics, jewelry, and a vintage record player that had sat in the corner of our living room since the day we moved in. I picked up freelance work on platforms that paid badly. I wrote marketing copy at midnight. I built spreadsheets for strangers. Still not enough. A collections notice arrived on a Tuesday and I sat on the bathroom floor reading it 3 times, trying to make the numbers say something different. They never did. I debated calling my parents for 9 days. I kept lists in my head of all the reasons not to. I remembered every time I had asked for help before and been made to feel like a burden. I remembered my father making me write out a repayment schedule when I was 22 and asked for a small loan between clients. I remembered the way my mother always made giving feel like a lecture. But I was out of options that would not destroy my credit. I called on a Thursday evening. My mother answered. I kept my voice even and explained the situation without crying, which cost me everything I had. I said I needed somewhere to stay temporarily while I got back on my feet. She went quiet. Then she said, "Come by Saturday. We will sit down and talk." I exhaled with relief. I told myself grief softens people. That watching me lose Marcus had changed something in them. I drove to their house on Saturday with 1 bag and a small amount of fragile hope. I should have known better. But hope is a hard thing to kill, even when you have every reason to let it go. My parents sat across from me at the dining room table like I had been called in for a meeting. No food. No coffee. Just the 3 of us and a silence that meant someone had been rehearsing. My father spoke first. He said they were concerned about the pattern they were seeing. He used the word pattern like it was a medical finding. My mother said I had always been too emotional about business. She said building a firm without a safety net was irresponsible. She said Marcus had been a good man, but I had structured my financial life around an unprotected relationship. I sat very still. My father said helping me now might not teach me anything. He used the word teach like I was a teenager who had overspent her allowance, not a woman who had spent 11 days in a hospital watching someone she loved die. I asked if I could at least stay in my old room for a few weeks while I steadied myself. My mother tilted her head in the way she had, the one that always meant no but wanted to sound like consideration. That was when the front door opened behind me. Theo walked in carrying a folder of glossy brochures. He dropped them on the kitchen counter with the ease of someone who had never questioned whether he was welcome. He grabbed a soda from the fridge, popped it open, and leaned against the counter with a grin. "Did you tell her yet?" he asked my mother. My mother glanced at my father. My father cleared his throat. I picked up one of the brochures. A luxury condo development downtown. Rooftop terrace. Concierge. The kind of building you tour when life is going well. My mother said they had been helping Theo with a down payment. She said the timing was unfortunate but plans had been in place for a while. She hoped I would understand. I set the brochure down. They had the money. They had always had the money. They simply had a list and I was not on it. I had never been on it. Theo shrugged with a half smile of someone who knows they won and feels only mildly bad about it. I looked at my parents. Nobody apologized. I asked one more time. I kept my voice low and said, "Just a few nights. Not weeks. Not a month. Just enough nights to find my next step." My mother pressed her fingertips together like she was about to say something thoughtful. Then she said that having me in the house right now would not be good for Theo's energy. He was in an exciting period with the condo search and she did not want difficult emotions weighing things down. Theo's energy. I looked at her to see if she heard herself. She did. She just did not care. I stood up. I packed the few things I had brought and walked down the hallway and through the living room and out the front door. That was when the rain started. My suitcase was on the porch. My mother appeared in the doorway and pointed toward the street. "Figure it out, Avery. We are done financing your bad decisions." The deadbolt clicked. I stood in the rain with 4% battery, clothes scattered in the mud, looking at the house I grew up in. I had asked for almost nothing, and they had made sure I understood that nothing was still more than I was worth. I found a motel 11 miles away before my battery died. It was the kind of place with a parking lot that smelled like exhaust and a vending machine with 3 empty slots. The carpet had a pattern that might have been hiding anything. The air conditioning unit rattled every time it tried to change speed. I sat on the edge of the bed and did the math on how many nights I could afford. 17. Maybe 20 if I skipped breakfast. Then I cried. I cried on the bathroom floor with the water running so I could not hear myself. I cried for Marcus and for the kitchen window and for the life I had been building 6 months ago. I cried for the woman who had driven to her parents' house with fragile hope and been pointed toward the street. Then I got up. I washed my face with the rough motel towel and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Not because I liked what I saw, because I needed to be sure I was still there. Then I opened my laptop. The screen lit up blue in the dark room. 11 unopened emails. $42 in my account. I started typing. The next 3 months were the hardest I have lived through. I took every project the freelance platforms offered. I wrote product descriptions for companies selling things I had never used. I built financial models for clients who paid late and complained about formatting. I drafted reports at 2 in the morning with a gas station sandwich beside the keyboard. I slept 4 hours a night, sometimes 3. I ate whatever was cheapest. Rice from a hot plate. Microwave meals from the corner store that listed sodium levels that seemed like a dare. A second collections notice arrived. Then a third. I worked through all of it. Not because I had a plan. Because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant feeling and feeling meant the bathroom floor again. Some nights I sat by the window watching headlights move across the highway and tried to remember what Marcus sounded like when he laughed. Not because it helped. Because I was afraid of forgetting. Some mornings I made myself say one thing out loud before opening the laptop. Today I am still here. That had to be enough. The first real win came from a client I had almost turned down. His name was Preston Burke, a small manufacturing firm owner who found me through an old referral. The project brief looked complicated and paid less than it should. I took it anyway because I needed the hours. I spent 2 weeks rebuilding his vendor tracking system. I found 4 cost leaks he had not known about and wrote a summary clear enough that his team could act on it without me. He called on a Friday afternoon and said it was the most useful outside work his company had ever received. Direct, thorough, no unnecessary complexity. He said most consultants made things harder to justify their fees. Then he asked if he could pass my name to 2 people he knew. I said yes so fast I was embarrassed. Both referrals came within the week. Both paid on time. One told me I had a clear way of seeing problems others missed. I wrote that down. I had spent months feeling like I could not see anything clearly. But something in me was still working. Still sharp. I closed my laptop that night and ate a real dinner for the first time in weeks. Diane Parker sent a message on a Tuesday morning. I had worked with her 5 years earlier when she was running operations for a logistics company. She was sharp and fair and gave feedback the way good mentors do, directly and without cruelty. I had lost touch with her after Marcus died. I had lost touch with most people. She said she had seen some of my recent freelance reviews in a professional network group and thought the work looked like mine. She wanted to grab coffee. I almost did not go. I was ashamed of where I was living. I sat with the message for 2 days before answering. Then I thought about the motel and the vending machine and the reports at 2 in the morning, and I asked myself what staying small out of shame would cost me over time. I wrote back and said yes. We met near her office. She bought the coffee without making it a thing. She asked questions and listened fully. She did not flinch at what I told her. By the end of the hour, she said she had a project in mind. The project was with a boutique advisory firm that handled mid-market acquisitions. They needed someone to manage the operational assessment for a potential deal, reviewing the target company's internal structure, finding inefficiencies, and presenting findings to the acquisition committee. It required exactly the work I had been doing for years, but at a higher level. Diane said she had recommended me. She told them I was the sharpest operational eye she had worked with, and that I communicated problems without ego. I drove home from that coffee meeting and sat in my motel room for 20 minutes without moving. The fee was more than I had earned in the previous 3 months combined. The timeline was tight. The pressure was real. There was no room for the kind of distraction grief had been making of my mind. I was terrified. I called Diane back and said I was in. She said she already knew. I spent that night filling a notebook with everything I knew about acquisition assessments. My handwriting was shaky at first. Then it got steadier. Something in me was waking up that I had thought was gone. My mother texted 4 weeks into the project. She wrote, "Hope you are doing okay. Haven't heard from you in a while." No apology. No reference to the lawn, the rain, or the deadbolt. No acknowledgement that the last time we had spoken, she had pointed me toward the street with 4% battery on my phone. "Just hope you are doing okay, the way you check on a neighbor you see sometimes at the mailbox." I read the message twice. Then I put my phone face down and went back to work. I did not know how to have the real conversation inside a text, and I did not have the energy to attempt it in the middle of the most important project of my career. So I said nothing. For the first time in my life I did not reach back. It did not feel cruel. Felt like survival. Like finally understanding that some doors drain you when you open them, and you are allowed to decide which ones you walk through. The committee presentation was 11 days away. My cousin Brianna called in week 6 and told me something I had not asked for. Theo was struggling. The condo was bought, but he had leased a car he could not afford. He was spending on restaurants and clothes and weekend trips at a rate that concerned people around him. Gambling rumors were going around the family. Our parents were covering things. Their credit had been extended. There had been quiet conversations about their accounts. About the house. I thanked Brianna and got off the call. I did not feel satisfied. I want to be clear about that. There was no joy in any of it. Only a heavy, tired sadness that comes when a thing you feared finally arrives, and being right about it brings no comfort at all. I thought about my brother growing up being told the rules did not quite apply to him, about how easy it is to keep spending when someone always steps in. I was not angry at Theo. I was angry at what they had built around him over a lifetime, but I had no room to stay in that feeling. The presentation was 9 days away. Week 7 nearly broke everything. On a Sunday night at 11, I found a serious error in my operational assessment. A data set the target company had provided contained a structural change from 2 years earlier that nobody had flagged. My entire third section needed to be rebuilt. The committee meeting was 4 days away. I did not sleep that night. I pulled every source document and started from the raw numbers. By Monday morning I had a new framework. By Tuesday evening I had the rebuilt section. By Wednesday afternoon, after nearly 48 hours of work, I had a presentation that was stronger than the original because I had been forced to go deeper. I sent it to Diane at 9 Wednesday night with a brief note explaining what I had found and fixed. She replied in 12 minutes. She wrote, "This is better. Good catch. Get some sleep." I sat back in my chair and exhaled. My hands were shaking. 3 empty coffee cups on the desk. But I had not quit. I had found the problem and fixed it. That mattered more than I could say. Diane called on a Friday afternoon, 6 weeks after the committee presentation. The acquisition had moved forward. The lead partner, a man named Garrison Cole, had used my operational findings as a primary basis for the deal structure. He had asked Diane specifically who had done the assessment work. Now Garrison's firm was in the middle of something much larger. A full company acquisition worth $50 million. They needed someone to lead the operational due diligence on their side. The pressure would be significant and the timeline was tight. Diane said Garrison wanted to know if I was available. I was sitting on the edge of my motel bed. The AC unit was rattling. There was a coffee ring on the nightstand I had been ignoring for 3 days. I said, "Tell him yes." Dan laughed. Then she said something I needed to hear. She said I had earned this, not through a favor, but through work that was impossible to argue with. I held the phone in both hands after she hung up. I looked around the motel room and thought about the lawn, the rain, and the bathroom floor. Something was about to change. The next 5 months disappeared into the work. I moved out of the motel into a small furnished studio. It was not much, but it had a real kitchen and a window that caught afternoon light. I thought about Marcus sometimes when I stood at that window. Some days it was painful. Some days it just felt like company. I worked the way I had learned in the motel with everything I had. The due diligence process was intense, and I loved it in the honest way you love something that rewards you for giving it everything. I built a small team of contractors for specific tasks. I managed the timeline directly. I communicated with Garrison's partners clearly and asked the questions that made people uncomfortable because they mattered. Garrison said in one meeting that I had an unusual ability to walk into a complicated situation and find the load-bearing wall. I wrote that down. I had no social life during those months. Called Diane occasionally. No family contact at all. I was lonely in a way I had learned to live alongside. But for the first time in a long time I was building something real. My father called in month 4 of the deal. His voicemail was warm and casual in a way that made my chest tighten. He said he had heard I was doing well professionally and was glad. He said he and my mother had been thinking about me and would love to catch up for dinner. He said it like none of it had happened. Like the rain did not exist. Like the deadbolt had not clicked. Like my mother had never stood in a doorway pointing toward the street while my suitcase lay open in the mud. My mother texted the same week. She said she missed having me around. I read both messages and sat with them for a long time. Then I set my phone down and went back to the acquisition review I had been working on. I did not block them. I was not ready for that conversation and did not want to have it in the middle of the most important work of my career. But I did not reach back either. I was learning that responding on other people's schedule, rather than your own, is one of the quieter ways we hand our power away. I was done doing that. Brianna called again in month 5 and this time did not soften it. Theo's debt had collapsed. The gambling was confirmed. There were loan defaults with 2 lenders. He had missed condo payments for 3 months and the car lease was under review. My parents had stepped in, as always. But the size of the problem had outgrown what they could quietly absorb. Their own credit had been extended. An investment account had been liquidated. There were conversations about the house. Their house. The one I grew up in. The safety net they had spent decades building to protect one child while pointing the other toward the street. Brianna said the family was shaken. My mother had been crying at dinners. My father had gone very quiet. I sat with the phone in my lap after the call. I did not feel satisfied. Not for 1 second. Just a dull, heavy sorrow that comes when the thing you always feared finally happens and being right about it changes nothing. The deal was closing in 11 days. I went back to work. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows and a city view I had no time to appreciate. We had been working toward this moment for 5 months. The document stack was thick. Lawyers sat on both sides of the table like opposing weather systems. Garrison sat at the head with the stillness of someone who has done this before and knows the final minutes are not for emotion. I sat near the middle and watched each page turn. The signatures moved around the table slowly, each one carrying the weight of 5 months of work finally landing somewhere real. When the last signature was placed, the lead attorney said, "We are done." Nobody cheered. I had imagined it would feel louder. Instead, papers were gathered and quiet conversations began at the edges of the room. I reached for my phone under the table. I opened my banking app. The deal included a success fee tied to my deliverables. I had known the number for weeks. But seeing it sitting in my actual balance, in plain digits on a plain screen, was entirely different from knowing it as a number. I stared at it. Then I put my phone away and looked out at the city and let myself feel it. The calls started the next morning. My father called 3 times before 9. My mother called twice. Then my father again. Then Theo from a number I did not recognize. By noon I had 14 missed calls. By evening 31. My mother left 4 voicemails. The first was soft and halting. She said they had made mistakes and that family was family. She said she loved me. Her voice broke at the end in a way that would have crushed me a year earlier. My father's voicemail was shorter. He said he wanted to sit down and talk things through. I listened to every one. Then I called my mother back. She answered in 2 rings, relief already in her voice before I said a word. I said, Saturday, 7 o'clock. Harlow's on Clement. She said yes immediately. I hung up, chose the most expensive restaurant I knew, and booked a table for 4. I was not going there to reconcile or to perform forgiveness I did not feel. I was going to finish it properly, in a well-lit room where everyone could see everything. They arrived together, my parents and Theo, 5 minutes early and arranged like people who had practiced. My mother hugged me at the table. My father shook my hand, which told me everything I needed to know about the evening. Theo nodded. He looked thinner and less certain than the last time I saw him leaning on the kitchen counter with a soda and an easy grin. For the first 20 minutes, it almost sounded like a family dinner. Then my father cleared his throat and said Theo was going through a hard time and the family needed to come together. There it was. I set my menu down. I looked at all 3 of them and said, without raising my voice, I want you to remember that I called from a hospital chair while Marcus was in surgery. I want you to remember that I asked to sleep in my own childhood bedroom and was told it would disturb Theo's energy. I want you to remember the lawn, the rain, and the deadbolt. My mother's eyes filled. Theo looked at the table. I said, you taught me who matters when everything falls apart. I am not unlearning that lesson now just because the consequences have arrived. Paid for my own meal. Then I said one final thing. I told them about Pauline, Marcus's sister, who had held my hand at the funeral and asked how I was actually doing. Months before this dinner, I had quietly used part of my earnings to help Pauline's elderly mother keep her home. She was 73, living on a fixed income, facing a property tax bill she could not manage. I paid it without being asked, without telling anyone, not because I wanted credit, because that was what it actually looked like when family meant something real. I looked at my parents and said, that is what I chose to do with my money when I finally had the freedom to choose. I chose the woman who treated me like a human being when I needed it most. My father had no speech for that. My mother's tears were real this time, I believe. But they were too late. I stood up. Theo started to speak. I did not wait. A few days later I signed the lease on a house near the river. It had a kitchen window that got good morning light. I stood alone in that empty room with the keys in my hand and thought about the motel bathroom floor, the lawn in the rain, and every morning I had woken up and said, today I am still here. They locked me out when I had nowhere to go. Funny how success makes people suddenly remember your address. I opened the window and let the light in.